It's Hamish Campbell reporting for Vision on TV, and we're trying to get some perspective on where the fracking movement is now. You've been involved for a while. Can you just give us a brief outline history of what you've done in the fracking movement?
It started off for me seeing Gasland, and that's why I ended up down in Borkham for 3 months, and totally changed my life. Completely changed my life. It changed a lot of people's lives. To see that the government are willing to sacrifice any form of democracy and the land that we live on and the air that we breathe and the water that we drink to corporations and sell that out was a real eye-opener for a lot of people. And so the anti-fracking movement actually became a lot bigger than fracking because people realised just how much the government were lying to them. And I recall David Cameron saying that there was no law that was going to be left that he didn't change for fracking to come in. And when we heard that, we didn't understand what he was saying. And then we watched him change every law. And last year we fought the Infrastructure Act, which basically changed the definition of fracking. And that changed the definition of fracking to the point where the only frack that ever happened in the UK was up in Priest Hall in Lancashire. And that would now not be classed as a frack because they've based it on the amount of water that is used. And you have professors like David Hasseltine who can't understand the logic behind this. And in the law, they also had to maximise the oil and gas recovery in the UK. And I look at something like that as being almost making, not to frack illegal. So they're basically telling corporations that if you don't frack, and there's an energy bill that's going through at the moment, and they're going to start penalising companies who have licences who don't actually start to exploit the extreme energy that's happening in the country.
So why is the government bending over so much to push this agenda?
Because they're bought and paid for, and the infrastructure that is put in place for fracking is, I think the figures are something like 28 billion for the amount of money that goes in just for building the infrastructure. And I also believe that it's the licenses. They make a lot of money for the licenses. So for them, they actually, whether or not fracking goes ahead, it's still the money for the licenses that they want to sell. That's what's happened in America. You see a lot of abandoned wells that, two big companies have gone in, they've had enough money to buy a license, realise that there's nothing there viable, and they've just left this well polluted while the taxpayer has to pick it up, which is exactly what's going to happen here in the UK. It is quite disturbing, the push that they have, considering that they've got the Climate Change Act of 2008, and it's been proven now that fracking is, for the fact of the amount of methane that is released, which is a really dangerous, aspect for the climate, worse than carbon dioxide to a certain extent. And this is not a transition energy by any means. And by the time that they actually put the infrastructure into place for fracking, will be the time that we actually have to stop using fossil fuels. They've taken away the subsidies for renewables. In the budget this year, they have given more subsidies to the fossil fuel companies. And with the Paris Agreement of trying to keep it under 2 degrees, it's a joke. It's an absolute joke.
So, the big picture, how can they be so stupid and so evil? A big picture answer to that.
God, how can they be so stupid and so evil? I think that the difference in reality for someone like David Cameron and George Osborne, who are Eton educated, they are so wealthy that they have no actual realisation of what goes on in this country, which is why they can enforce the laws that they do. And so I like to, I look at that. It's a really interesting question. I think of someone like George Osborne, and I've met someone like Tina Louise Rothery, and I know her reasonably well. And she wanted to run. A lot of the anti-frackers decided that they would take the path of trying to change it in a democratic way, and they run for the Green Party or an independent party in the elections. And where Tina lives, she lives in Tatton, which is against George Osborne. And I said to her, what was it like actually meeting this man? And she said to me, she goes, I looked at him and I thought, this is a human being. At a stage in his life, he would have been a baby, and I could have possibly loved this person. Now he's a robot. He is a robot. They live in a completely unrealistic world. And when you actually realise the corruption that goes on in our government, and for most part, people don't know that. They don't know that vast amounts of money is exchanging hands to keep the wealth where they think it should be. As we know, austerity is false. Austerity is a class war, and it's the same like with fracking. They don't care whether or not the devastation it leaves behind. They sell in this whole energy independence.
Why don't they care?
Because they're only in for how they've got an amount of time that they're in for. I don't think anyone is looking at the long-term plan here, unless we are not privy to Plan B. And we know about the even the captive, the carbon storage, and that was another aspect with fracking. They had the Royal Geological Society and the British I can't recall the names, but they did tests a couple of years ago about not only using boreholes for nuclear waste, which I don't think that they really can push ahead with, but they're going to try, but also to put carbon within there. And it's so expensive to do this that they've already dropped it. This is a multi-million-pound project that they've already gone, it's not even going to work. And then you've got the aspect of geoengineering, where it gets to the point where our planet's heating up so much, you're just going to put something in the sky. I don't know whether or not they actually think that these Plan Bs are viable. And I would love to sit in the room with these people to get some sort of aspect of their reality, to try and understand that we are pushing so many species to extinction, and we are changing everything so rapidly that we're even pushing ourselves into a level of to extinction.
So let's go back to Balcombe. Balcombe, I can never pronounce it. How did you hear about it, and what did you feel when you turned up?
Well, my mum lived local, and that's how I got involved. And I went down one day just to see whether or not I could go and stay down there. It was something that was close to my heart because my mum lived close by, and I had seen Gasland, and I was so shocked by the devastation this extreme energy extraction can cause. And it was, at the same time, it was also an experimental thing for me to see how I would cope with living. This is the first time I've ever lived on a protest camp, and the experiment was to see how I coped with different forms of people that I wouldn't normally put myself in the company of, and it was challenging, very challenging, and I didn't take on board having the oppression of the police constantly, and the damage that how detrimental that is to your mental health constantly. And we were very lucky in Balcombe, and everyone knows this, that Balcombe, Middle England, beautiful countryside, weather was fantastic. And that was on our side. And, you've got other camps like Barton Moss, which was so extreme. And we've figured now that because of Balcombe, what the energy companies are doing, the extraction companies, oil companies, gas companies are doing, they're making sure that they do it in the winter. Because it's hard, it's hard for people to camp. So, Balcombe was, it was 3 months that people camped there, and it definitely showed the oil and gas industry the fight that they had on their hands. And I can never understand why they chose Balcombe. To me, if I really want to think whether it was an experiment to see if they drilled in Middle England, if they got away with it, it'd be like, okay, we've got this sussed. But to see that they went to somewhere like Balcombe and it was like, no, you are not doing this to our land. You are not doing it to here. And Balcombe now, this is amazing. Balcombe now have Repower Balcombe. They are going to be running on solar power. They are running their schools on solar power. They've got like people, the locals have put money into a community-based energy project, and that's exactly if one of the good things that happen is that every site that goes on in England, because this is what happened at Barton Moss too, they had a community energy project, and if that leaves the trail that we leave with local energy projects, that is a massive plus.
But come on, tell us about arriving at the camp. Do you have a tent, and where did you put it up? Who was your neighbour?
Oh, it was my neighbour. Actually, my first time, when I arrived, the neighbour that I had, I hardly saw her again. And we've ended up being really good friends much later down the line. And I was only chatting on the phone to her the other day. And it is incredible, the relationships that is formed. And I was very fortunate because I was a local, that I lived on there, but I could go back to my mum's and shower up and decompress and feed myself, even though the food was amazing down there. So I had that luxury. A lot of people who were down there, that was just their life. And it was, it opened up my eyes in many, many ways.
So tell us a little bit about camp dynamics. What did you observe?
The camp dynamics, I discovered that, there is a particular type of person who can do frontline over and over again. And I would love to think that I could do frontline. But I know that for my mental health, that it's not necessarily good for me. I'm someone who does still engage in a normal lifestyle, and what I've witnessed is that it does, it does attract many people who are completely disillusioned with society, and that's, of course, we all are. And, there's a few people that are broken. Which they want to make some changes, but they're confused themselves. And you can find a lot of anger, but at the same time you can find a lot of compassion, and emotions can run pretty high. What they have done is that having a camp right at a site totally distresses the investors. And as much as how anyone thinks about camps and about having it on their doorstep, they do move away, and you have all of that dynamic that goes on, but they are slow walking trucks. They are slowing down the industry, and people do not want to invest in an industry where they see such, resistance. And you watch iGas, when they first formed, I was 160, like 2 pence. They dropped down to something under 40p, and that was from Barton Moss. So it's a tough one.
So camps have two purposes. One is to protest and to affect the share price and to raise publicity.
And to protect the land.
But the second one is also to provide an alternative, to show a different vision of the world.
Absolutely, it does. It tries to it tries to show that there are people who want to, live off grid, and they don't need all those luxuries of life to be able to cope. And community-based living, having where, you do have to, you do actually have to provide some effectiveness from yourself to make a camp happen. And it's not somewhere that, you can just turn up, sit down with a can of lager in your hand and expect people to do it for you. And you've got to, like anything, you've got to work at it.
Well, it's a balance of the two, isn't it?
Yes. And...
do you have ideas for making that balance more healthy at a future camp from your experience from the past?
Yeah, no drugs, no alcohol. And if it is, it's hard to enforce that, no. But it's like if you want to do that, there is this space that you can. This space, you can't. And you've also got to consider that if you are going to take that space to do that, that you also want to step up to make sure that you are engaged in the resistance that is happening. Because there's no point being in a camp unless you're engaged in that resistance. And if you're going to use drugs and alcohol, as an escapism, which we've all done. I'm not making any judgments myself. I have been there, I have done it, but it will be detrimental, So I think by having a safer spaces policy, of having particular spaces or times or areas that people can do what their vices within certain means, and having alternative spaces for meditation. At Borkham, that we had a Buddhist meditation tent, and that was incredible.
It worked very well because it provided a calm, centering space.
It did.
Take away the religion, it's still there.
Absolutely, and I appreciate Buddhist beliefs. I'm not Buddhist by any means, but I would use that tent to go in at moments of utter frustration at what I was witnessing, and to be able to calm down. And what I would love to see across the camps is having a network of psychologists and, massage therapists and alternative therapists that would go around to the camps and assist, because we have a lot of broken people out there, and it's not right to turn these people away. That's what community is all about, and it's a way of finding that we can encompass them and encourage them in ways that we can deal with them, certain levels of therapy we have. And this is happening through the camps. We've got people who are doing, holistic medicine up in like Upton. We have people who are giving out, herbs, aromatherapy, and all this sort of aspects to kind of have a fluffy, chilled effect.
Do you feel there's any connection to past protests? Because what you just described already existed. There was activist trauma who did exactly what,
yes.
Provided that for service. And actually there is a psychological project for activist burnout.
Yes, there is.
These kinds historically have existed, but do you think there's a problem of disconnect with the fracking movement, with the older versions of activism?
No, I don't think so. I just think that because, this is what I explained earlier, I think fracking's different because it's when we really did realise that the government were willing to shaft us, and to see even people from Borkham, who very wealthy, conservative voters, realise that this was happening and how the police actually treated us, this was eye-opening. Yeah. And this is why I believe that conspiracy theories run rampant in camps, because if you've had the whole fundamental, your belief system of thinking that you're going to go to school and educated in a particular way, and the government is there for you, as a power to help you, and then suddenly you realise that that's not how it works, then you're almost like a newborn child. You're learning again, and everything that you know has been taken away from you. So then along comes the internet conspiracy theories, and you are receptive to that because you don't know what you believe, because everything that's been taught to you is a lie. So it's easy to lap all of those up and not really take on board what is true and what is not. And I think that is a journey within an activist life. Even myself, I watched Zeitgeist, I saw all of that, and the 9/11, and you take all of that on, and you have to work through it. It's like a religion. You work through it to know what's right and what's wrong, whether there is some truth in something, that then there's a platform for it to get bigger, and it's one of the things that causes the most division in the anti-fracking movement. We have people out there who actually believe that the earth is flat.
That's a lot of madness.
Absolute madness. And I don't know what causes that for people,
Well, I think you've described it. Yes. I think this challenging of worldview.
It is, and hopefully what happens, and it is a journey within life, that, these people who are flat earthers suddenly realised, because they've come from this aspect of not believing anything, and they work that through logically, they kind of go, oh, yeah, maybe it is round. Hallelujah.
But it can be very discrediting, can't it?
It can be discrediting, I think all movements, and And again, there's a conspiracy in this, but we have no idea how heavily we are infiltrated.
Well, we do. If you look at the whole policing and all activism, we're heavily infiltrated.
We've got the Pickford inquiry that's happening, and
there is police spy somewhere in this building tonight. It's just normal.
Absolutely, they have only.
Yes.
There's only 10% of the undercover cops' names that have been released. And considering that since 1969, the amount that we know of, that means that there are so many more. And they're not going to release the names of that, and the whole Pickford inquiry for undercover cops is a whitewash. It goes straight to the Home Office. It goes straight to someone like Theresa May, and she's never going to release any of the truth.
So what's your practical advice for people to kind of overcome this paranoia and fear, because it does exist?
It does exist. I think it's, community. It's about, learning about the people that you're with. They are... What happened with like Mark Kennedy and all of these undercover cops, they all had stories. And I think we're all onto those stories now. So it is about learning about people's families, about people's histories, about, an undercurrent that they do have is having really vague ideals. And, once you have, there's like Netpol.
That kind of does describe half the people at Bulkham, come on.
No, not really. I think that you could sit down with a lot of people and you would know, because that's where a lot of our anger comes from, is our family issues. And when you're having people who, are talking about that, it is difficult, very difficult. And I think who knows whether they actually knew the damage that they were going to cause. I actually think it was a plus for them when they started infiltrating from as early as 1968 or 69, that the devastation that they would leave with an activist movement of the mistrust, it was a major bonus for them. And it happens here more than anywhere else, not in the Western world.
Yes. We're noticing at the minute.
Yeah, I spent some time at an anti-fracking camp in Spain, and, they don't have the infiltration like they have here. Not so. Maybe they do, but I don't think it goes down to such grassroots organisations.
Yes.
This is the problem that we have. I mean, when you're thinking about cops infiltrating, reclaim the streets.
They were the people in charge of everything. They were at the centre of everything.
Why? They're infiltrating these movements. That I was contacted by a friend last year. She works in a school that deals with autism, and she's a teacher's assistant. And she was like, "Oh, we had some cops in our school, Elaine." And basically, this cop said that anti-frackers were basically terrorists. And I was like, "What?" And I'm like, "Can you give me the name of the policeman and what was going on?" And she backed away because she didn't want to get into trouble. And so there's that going on. And they've also thrown environmental activists that if you are anti-frackers, you are considered. We used to, it was a domestic extremist, but now it's getting to the point where we're terrorists.
Reclaim the Streets was on the official list of American terrorist organisations back in the day.
It's insane, because...
I'm sure Phoenix is a terrorist.
Yeah, of course, because they're looking at where the power structure is. And... They're looking at where the power could come from. I went to a really interesting workshop with this guy called Roger Hallam, and he's doing a PhD. He's got part of this radical think tank, and he's doing a PhD on the dynamics and design of effective radical political collaboration. And it was really interesting to learn that to have a revolution takes less than 2% of the people. The French Revolution had less than 1%. And it's about cutting off the corporate media so that people do not keep taking in this mainstream bullshit to be able to understand exactly what's going on. And we always think they were on the cusp. We are in a revolution right now. It's just slow. We're not going out on the streets because, we don't have that. We think that we're in a fascist regime, but we're not being shot as we go out on the street. When we think about how bad our police are here, God, when you look at other countries, when I was in Paris for the climate talks, those French cops, they don't muck around, and it's like they're gonna beat you up badly, So even though we complain about the British police, and I despise them over here in their, their institutionalised racism, we still have it relatively easy, thank God. But who knows where that's going to go, you know.
Final message on fracking?
It's an uphill struggle, but we will win.